There comes a time in life when you think you've finally earned your peace, when the world stops asking and you can just be. Wilma Gorse, at 63, believed she'd found exactly that in her mountain yurt with Tully, her loyal dog. Then a letter arrived from a lawyer she'd never heard of. She'd inherited a carriage house in Kentmere Hollow from a great-aunt nobody ever talked about. When Wilma hiked down with her backpack and thermos of mint tea, she found chickens in the yard, goats on the roof, and a pig blocking the door like a guardian. Inside sat something covered in dust, but humming with strange purpose. The animals weren't just strays, they were connected to the house and to her family's vanishing women. What was her great-aunt hiding all those years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The yurt had been Wilma's refuge for 3 years now, perched at 7,800 feet, where the wind carried the scent of lodgepole pine and nothing else. She'd built it herself, with Vernon's help, Vernon being the only neighbor within 5 miles who didn't ask questions about why a woman her age wanted to live alone on a mountain. The frame went up in late summer, the canvas walls stretched tight by autumn, and by the first snow she had a wood stove, a sleeping platform, and a life that finally belonged to only her. Tully, a shepherd mix with one torn ear and eyes like amber glass, had found her that first winter, or maybe she'd found him. Either way, they suited each other, both scarred, both preferring silence to explanation, both content to watch the days pass without needing them to mean anything more than survival and small comforts. Her marriage had ended badly. Not with violence, though there'd been enough of that in the early years. It ended with Glenn's quiet, corrosive disappointment in everything she was and wasn't. 28 years of measuring herself against his expectations and finding herself lacking. When he finally left for a woman from his insurance office, someone younger, someone who laughed at his jokes, Wilma felt only relief. The divorce papers arrived on her 59th birthday. She signed them at the kitchen table and felt lighter than she had in decades. Her children, 2 sons grown and scattered, called on holidays, dutiful calls, brief and surface level. They'd absorbed their father's version of events, the one where their mother had given up and stopped trying. She'd stopped arguing years ago, let them believe what made sense to them. She had her mountain, her dog, her silence. Before the yurt, Wilma had worked as a wilderness guide, leading tourists through the backcountry, teaching them to read maps and weather, to move quietly through the forest, to notice things. She was good at it. Better than good. But the work required optimism she no longer felt, required her to smile and reassure, and pretend that nature was only beautiful, never indifferent. So she'd retired early, sold the small house in town, and disappeared into the high country. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late September. The mail carrier, a woman named Bethany who drove up the mountain road twice a week, handed it through the yurt's door with raised eyebrows. "Lawyer's office," she said. "Hope it's nothing bad." Wilma turned the envelope over in her hands after Bethany left. Heavy paper, embossed return address, Thornhill and Associates, a firm out of Ridgeway, 2 hours south. She didn't know any lawyers, didn't know anyone in Ridgeway for that matter. Inside, the letter was formal and impersonal. It informed her that she was the sole beneficiary of the estate of Wilma Gorse, deceased as of March 14th of that year. The estate consisted primarily of real property, a carriage house and surrounding 3 acres in Kentmere Hollow. The letter requested her presence at the firm's office at her earliest convenience to finalize the transfer. Wilma Gorse. The name stirred something distant in Wilma's memory, like a word heard once in childhood and half forgotten. Her great-aunt, she thought. Her grandmother's sister, though she couldn't remember anyone ever speaking the name aloud. There'd been some family silence around Opal, some unspoken agreement not to ask. Wilma's mother, gone now for a decade, had been a woman of rigid propriety and carefully maintained appearances. She'd married well, raised her children in a tidy suburban home, and never once, in all Wilma's memory, mentioned having family in the mountains. When Wilma was young and curious, asking about grandparents and cousins and family trees, her mother's answers were clipped and dismissive. "We don't talk about that side," she'd say, and the conversation would end. The photograph came back to her then, sudden and clear. She'd been maybe 8 or 9, rummaging through a box in the attic, and found it tucked beneath layers of old linens. A woman in a dark dress, standing in front of a wooden building, her face stern, and her eyes, even in the faded sepia, seeming to look directly through the camera and into whoever might look back. Wilma had brought it downstairs, excited to learn who this severe woman might be. Her mother had snatched it from her hands, face white, and sent Wilma outside to play. The photograph never reappeared. Now, holding the lawyer's letter, Wilma wondered if that woman had been Opal. She spent that evening in the yurt, thinking about family, about the women she'd come from. Her grandmother had died when Wilma was 12, a quiet woman who baked bread and kept house and never, as far as Wilma could remember, expressed an opinion about anything that mattered. Her mother had been different, harder, more concerned with what the neighbors thought, with keeping up appearances. She'd raised Wilma to be polite, to be small, to not make waves. It had taken Wilma 40 years to realize how much of herself she'd buried to meet those expectations. The wind picked up outside, rattling the canvas walls. Tully shifted in his sleep, paws twitching through some dream. Wilma watched the fire in the wood stove, the flames casting shadows that danced and merged. She called the number on the letterhead the next morning. The lawyer, a man with a soft voice and careful diction, was pleased to hear from her. Yes, they'd been searching for her for some months. Yes, the property was hers, free and clear. No debts, no liens, just the house and land, waiting. He could meet her Friday if that suited her, and afterward she'd have the keys. "What kind of condition is it in?" Wilma asked. "The house, I mean." A pause. "I haven't been there personally, Miss Gorse, but I understand it's been vacant for some time. You'll want to see it yourself before making any decisions." Something in his tone made her uneasy, a hesitation, as if he knew more than he was saying. She spent the days before Friday preparing. There was no rush. Really, she had nothing tying her to any schedule, but the mystery of it pulled at her. An inheritance from a woman she'd never met, a house in a hollow she'd never heard of, and beneath it all, the sense that her mother had worked very hard to keep this part of the family hidden. Friday came cold and bright, the aspens turning gold at the higher elevations. Wilma packed a day pack with water, a thermos of mint tea, jerky for Tully, and a flashlight. She wore her hiking boots and a wool jacket. Whatever condition the house was in, she wanted to be prepared. The drive down took her through valleys she hadn't seen in years. Kentmere Hollow was tucked into a fold of mountains south of the main range, accessible only by a narrow county road that wound through stands of spruce and across a creek running high with late-season melt. The landscape changed as she descended the high alpine meadows, giving way to dense forest, the air growing warmer and thicker with the smell of earth and decay. The lawyer's office was in a converted house on Ridgeway's main street. Inside, it smelled of old paper and furniture polish. Thornhill himself was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous habit of adjusting them every few sentences. He spread papers across his desk and walked her through the details. The property had been in Opal's name since 1940. She'd lived there alone, never married, and left specific instructions in her will that the estate was to pass to Wilma Ann Gorse, daughter of Caroline Gorse Fletcher, upon Opal's death. "She was quite specific about you," Thornhill said, pushing a document across the desk. "Wouldn't name an alternate, just you." "I never met her," Wilma said. "Never even heard her name until this week." Thornhill nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this. "Family estrangements," he said quietly. "More common than people think." He gave her the keys, an ornate brass ring holding 7 mismatched keys of various sizes and ages and directions to the property. It was another 30 minutes south and east, deeper into the hollow. He warned her the road was rough. He didn't ask if she planned to keep the place or sell it, and she appreciated that. She didn't know yet herself. "One more thing," Thornhill said as she stood to leave. "There are some animals on the property. Your great-aunt kept chickens and goats. I'm told they're still there. Someone's been feeding them, though I don't know who." Wilma thanked him and left, the keys heavy in her jacket pocket. The drive took her past farmsteads and logging roads, past clearings where old homesteads had collapsed into the earth, past stands of aspen so thick the light turned green and trembling. The county road became a dirt track, then barely a track at all. She followed Thornhill's directions, counting turnoffs, watching for the landmarks he'd described. 20 minutes in, she saw the mailbox, rusted leaning, the name Gorse, barely visible in flaking paint. The driveway was overgrown, saplings crowding in from both sides. She drove slowly, branches scraping the truck's sides, until the forest opened into a small clearing and she saw the house. It wasn't what she'd expected. Not a ruin exactly, but tired. A 2-story structure of weathered clapboard, once painted white but now grey with age and neglect. The carriage house doors on the lower level hung crooked on their hinges. The windows upstairs were intact, but filmed with years of grime. The roof sagged in the middle, shingles missing in patches, and impossibly there were goats standing on it, 3 of them, staring down at her truck with mild curiosity. Wilma cut the engine and sat for a moment, taking it in. The clearing around the house was wild, but not chaotic. Someone had been here. Maintaining something, a path to the door was visible through the weeds, and the garden plot near the side of the house showed signs of recent tending, though now it was mostly gone to seed. Chickens scattered as she opened the truck door, a dozen or more, pecking at the ground around the foundation. A pig, massive, bristled, and unconcerned, lay across the front steps like a guardian. It watched her approach with small, intelligent eyes. "Well," Wilma said to Tully, who jumped down beside her, "this is something." She approached slowly, the pig tracking her movement but not rising. The chickens reassembled at a distance, clucking softly. One of the goats bleated from the roof. The sound was strangely plaintive, almost like a greeting. Tully sniffed the air, his hackles rising slightly, then relaxing. Whatever he sensed here, it wasn't a threat. The front steps creaked under Wilma's weight. The pig shifted but didn't move. She stepped carefully around it, noting its size, easily 300 pounds, and the surprising cleanliness of its bristled hide. Someone had been caring for these animals, feeding them, at least. The front door was solid oak, weathered but intact. She tried the first key on the ring, then the second. The third one slid in smoothly and turned with a heavy click. The door swung inward on hinges that squealed in protest. Inside, the air was cool and still, thick with dust and the smell of long abandonment. Light slanted through the grimy windows, illuminating a front room furnished with pieces from another era. A horsehair sofa, a rocking chair with a crocheted afghan draped over its back, a table with a kerosene lamp, everything covered in a fine grey powder, untouched, waiting. And there on the table, beside the lamp, lay an open book. A journal, its pages yellowed, the handwriting precise and slanted. Wilma stepped closer, her boots loud on the wooden floor. Dust motes swirled in the light. The page was dated at the top, the 15th of September, 1982. Below that, in the same careful hand, "For the one who comes last." Wilma's breath caught. The next line read, "Wilma Ann, if you're reading this, then I've been waiting a very long time. Welcome home." Wilma stood frozen, staring at her name in ink that had dried decades ago. The journal page trembled slightly in the draft from the open door. Behind her, Tully whined softly, sensing her unease. She forced herself to breathe, to think. This made no sense. The date was 1982. She would have been 21 then, newly married, living 3 states away. How could Opal have known she'd be the one to come? She reached out and touched the page. The paper was thick, substantial. Below her name, the entry continued. You'll have questions. That's natural. But first, you need to understand what this house is and why it's yours now. Look around you, Wilma. Really look. This isn't just a building, it's a sanctuary. It's been that for 70 years, and if you're reading this, it means you're the one who'll decide whether it continues. Wilma surveyed the room more carefully. The sofa faced both the door and window's strategic placement. The table wasn't centered for aesthetics, but positioned where someone could see anyone approaching. Even the rocking chair offered a clear view of the entry. She moved deeper into the house, Tully beside her. The kitchen was surprisingly large, with a wood-burning cook stove and hand pump at the sink. Beyond it, a narrow hallway led to 2 doors. The first was locked. She tried keys until the fourth one worked. A simple bedroom. Single bed, iron frame, a quilt folded at its foot. On the dresser sat a framed photograph, the same one from her mother's attic. The stern woman in the dark dress, standing in front of this building. This had to be Opal. The second door opened into a larger room, chairs arranged in a circle. Bookshelves lined one wall, volumes on medicine, midwifery, herbalism, and law books. Texts on property rights, custody, domestic relations. On a side table, she found more journals. Stacks of them, each spine marked with years. She pulled one from 1955 to 1960 and opened it. The 12th of April, 1956. L. Arrived after midnight. Broken arm, 3 cracked ribs, stayed 6 days. Left for Albuquerque with papers and $40. The 3rd of June, 1956. K. And her 2 children. Youngest is 4, terrified of men. They'll stay until the husband stops searching. Entry after entry, women arriving in the night, staying days or weeks, then leaving for somewhere safer. Opal had operated a safe house. For decades, quietly, she'd provided refuge for women fleeing violence when no one else would help them. Wilma returned to the kitchen, legs unsteady. She turned the page in the first journal. I know what you're thinking. You came here expecting an old house, maybe some furniture to sell. Instead, you find this. I don't blame you if you walk away. But I want you to understand why I'm giving it to you. Not to your mother, she made her choice. You, specifically. Because I've been watching, Wilma. I know about Glenn. I know about the bruises you hid, the excuses you made. I know you got out eventually. You understand what it means to need a safe place. That's why this house is yours. Wilma's vision blurred. She hadn't talked about those years with anyone. A sound outside made her look up. The pig had risen, standing in the doorway, watching her with intelligent eyes. Movement at the tree line. A man emerged, elderly, carrying 2 buckets. He stopped when he saw Wilma, then raised one hand and continued forward. Tall, weathered face, white hair, canvas pants and flannel shirt. You'd be Wilma, he said. Vernon Hale. I live over the ridge. Been looking after Opal's critters since she passed. The name registered. Opal mentioned you. He nodded. She mentioned a lot in those journals. He began scattering corn for the chickens. You planning to stay? I don't know yet. Place has good bones. Opal kept it up as long as she could. He studied her. She talked about you. Toward the end. Said you'd come eventually. She couldn't have known that. Maybe not. But she believed it. Vernon picked up the empty buckets. She left something for you. In the cellar, in a locked box. You'll need the smallest key on that ring. What is it? Not my place to say. Cellar doors in the kitchen. He turned to go, then paused. If you need anything, my place is 30 minutes through the woods, due west. I'll be around either way. She watched him disappear into the forest. The cellar door was a heavy hatch near the pantry. Wilma descended steep stairs into cool darkness. Shelves held rows of canning jars, all labeled in Opal's handwriting. In the far corner sat a metal box. The smallest key opened it. Inside were papers, photographs, and a sealed envelope with her name. The letter was dated 3 weeks before Opal's death. Dear Wilma, if you're reading this, you've stayed long enough to find it. I'm going to tell you something your mother never wanted you to know. Something that changes how you understand your family. But, first, whatever you decide to do with this house, I won't judge you. You don't owe me anything. Now here's the truth. A sound from above, the front door slamming. Tully barked once. Footsteps crossed the floor, heavy and deliberate. Wilma climbed the stairs quietly. At the top, she peered through a gap in the hatch. A man stood in the kitchen, younger, maybe 50, wearing khakis and a polo shirt. He examined the room with methodical attention, then pulled out his phone. Yeah, I'm here. The old woman's place. Just like you said, middle of nowhere, falling apart. A pause. No, nobody around. Another pause. I'm telling you, this is perfect. Remote enough that nobody'll care. We rezone it, put in the access road, and we've got the trailhead for the whole development. Wilma's blood went cold. I'll start the paperwork Monday. With the old woman dead and no family claiming it, we can push through a tax sale, maybe eminent domain. 6 months from now, this place is ours. He ended the call and left. Wilma waited until she heard a car engine starting in the distance. She climbed out of the cellar. Tully waited, hackles raised, growling low. Opal's letter burned in her pocket. Someone wanted this house, wanted the land, and thought no one would fight them for it. They were wrong. Wilma spent that first night in the Carriage house, though she hadn't planned to. After the stranger's phone call, leaving felt like surrender. She brought her sleeping bag in from the truck, cleared dust from the horsehair sofa, and settled in with Tully at her feet and Opal's unfinished letter in her hands. She woke at dawn to chickens and pale light through grimy windows. The house was cold. She found the kitchen wood stove still functional, kindling stacked beside it. Vernon's work, she guessed. Within 20 minutes, she had a fire going and water heating. Tully went outside while Wilma made instant coffee and assessed the situation. The house was larger than it seemed, 2 stories plus the cellar. The structure was sound, despite appearances. What it needed was cleaning, repair, and someone to care whether it survived. She carried her coffee to the room with the journals and began reading systematically. Opal's first entry was dated June 1940. Moved into the Carriage house today. It's mine now, bought with money I earned myself. Nobody can tell me to leave. This is where I'll make my stand. Early entries were sparse, practical. Opal planted a garden, repaired the roof, installed the pump. She worked as a midwife throughout the hollow. The work paid poorly but steadily. The first woman arrived in August 1941. H came after midnight, walking. Her face is purple on one side, lips split. She says she fell, but I know that lie. I gave her the bedroom. In the morning, I'll see what can be done. 3 days later, H left for the train. She has a sister in Ohio. I gave her what money I could spare. She cried when she thanked me. I told her crying was allowed here, but so was anger. After that, they came regularly. Opal never advertised, but word spread. Women told other women. By 1945, she'd helped more than 30. By 1950, over 100. Wilma read through the morning, through the afternoon. The journals painted a picture of quiet, dangerous resistance. Opal never editorialized, simply recorded initials, dates, injuries, destinations. In the 1952 volume, she found a familiar initial, C. Arrived in April, 7 months pregnant. She's 17. Her father sent her here. The baby's father won't marry her. She'll stay until the baby comes, then adoption. C. Cries every night. Wilma's hands trembled. Caroline. Her mother, 17 in 1952. The 3rd of May 1952. C. Delivered a healthy girl at dawn. The baby has her mother's dark hair. C. held her for an hour, then asked me to take her away. The 10th of May 1952. My sister arrived to take the baby. Adoption papers signed. C. Leaves tomorrow. She hasn't spoken in 3 days. Wilma stood, needing to move. Her mother had given birth here, to a daughter Wilma had never known existed. She returned to the metal box from the cellar. Birth certificate dated the 3rd of May, 1952. Mother, Caroline Gorse. Father, unknown. Attending, Opal Gorse. Below it, adoption papers. The baby's name, Anne Fletcher. Adopted by Margaret and Harold Fletcher, Opal's sister and brother-in-law. Anne Fletcher would be 72 now. Wilma's aunt, raised as her mother's sister. Did she know the truth? Everything she'd believed about her family, its respectability, its careful distance from anything unseemly, was built on lies. Her mother had buried this so deep she'd cut all ties with Opal rather than risk it surfacing. A sound at the door. Vernon stood on the threshold, 2 buckets in hand. Brought some things. Thought you might be staying. I am, Wilma said, surprised by her certainty. Vernon nodded. He set down buckets, eggs and vegetables. Place needs work if you're planning to winter here. I know. I can help with repairs. Won't charge you. Opal helped my mother once. I owe her. What happened to your mother? She left my father when I was 10. He drank, and when he drank, he hit. She took me and my sisters to Opal's house. We stayed 3 months. Opal found her work in another county, helped her file for divorce. My father searched, but Opal knew how to hide people. My mother lived 40 good years after leaving him. That wouldn't have happened without Opal. I'm reading the journals, Wilma said. I didn't know any of this. My mother never told me. Some people need to forget. Can't blame them. Someone wants to buy this property, or take it. I overheard a phone call, a man talking about development, rezoning. Vernon's jaw tightened. Developers have been sniffing around for years. They want the land for tourism, second homes. Most families have sold. I won't. Opal wouldn't have either. The lawyer said the estate passed to me free and clear, but this man talked like there was a way around that. There might be. Tax sales, eminent domain, adverse possession, if they can prove abandonment. They'll try every angle. Vernon met her eyes. You planning to fight them? Wilma thought of the journals, the women who'd passed through this house. She thought of her mother's secret, of Anne Fletcher, who might not know her story. She thought of the stranger's voice, casual and confident, certain no one cared. Yes, she said, I'm going to fight them. The next morning, Vernon returned with tools and a list. He'd walked the property at first light, assessing what needed immediate attention. The roof, he said, would hold through winter but needed patching. The windows could be cleaned and resealed. The hand pump worked, but the well needed inspection. The list went on. I'll start with the roof, he said. You should go into town, talk to Thornhill again, find out exactly what your legal standing is. If someone's making moves on this place, you need to know your rights. Wilma agreed. She left Tully with Vernon. The dog had bonded with the property's animals overnight, appointing himself their guardian, and drove back to Ridgeway. Thornhill's office looked different in morning light, less formal and more worn. The secretary, a woman Wilma's age with reading glasses on a chain, showed her straight in. Miss Gorse, Thornhill said, standing. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Is everything all right? I need to know about challenges to the estate. Can anyone contest my inheritance? Thornhill's expression shifted, became guarded. In theory, yes, family members could contest if they believed they had legitimate claim. But according to Opal's will, you're the sole heir. She had no children, no other living relatives who weren't already excluded by name. What about the county? Could they take the property for unpaid taxes or eminent domain? The taxes are current through this year. Opal was meticulous about that. He paused. Has someone approached you about the property? Not directly, but I overheard something that concerned me. Thornhill removed his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth from his desk. There's been interest in Kentmere Hollow from developers. The land values have increased significantly. Some property owners have sold willingly. Others have been encouraged. Encouraged how? Tax assessments suddenly increase. Building code violations appear that never existed before. Access roads get reclassified, making properties harder to reach. Small pressures that add up. He replaced his glasses. Opal resisted those pressures for years. She knew how the system worked, knew her rights. I helped her file injunctions twice to stop the county from condemning her access road. And now that she's gone, now they might assume the property's vulnerable. A new owner, unfamiliar with local politics, might be easier to move. Thornhill met her eyes. "Are you planning to keep the property, Miss Gorse?" "I am." "Then you should know there's a planning commission meeting next Tuesday. They're discussing a new recreation area development in the Hollow. I'd recommend attending." Wilma thanked him and left. She spent the rest of the morning at the county recorder's office, pulling documents, property surveys, tax records, zoning maps. She photocopied everything related to Opal's land and the surrounding parcels. The pattern Vernon had described was visible in the records. Properties acquired, rezoned, consolidated. The Hollow was being systematically absorbed. When she returned to the carriage house, Vernon had scaffolding up and was working on the roof. She found a ladder and joined him. "You don't have to," he started. "I know, but I'm not sitting idle while you do all the work." They worked through the afternoon, replacing damaged shingles, resealing joints. The physical labor felt good after hours reading dusty documents. Vernon worked with the efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime maintaining buildings. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was useful, pointing out structural issues, explaining repair techniques, sharing knowledge accumulated over decades. By evening, a third of the roof was done. They climbed down as the sun touched the ridge. "There's something else you should see," Vernon said. "In the cellar. Opal showed me once, years ago." They descended into the cool darkness. Vernon led her past the shelves of preserves to the far wall. He pressed against the stone in a specific pattern, 3 blocks in sequence. A section of wall swung inward, revealing a narrow space behind. Wilma stared. A hidden room. Opal called it the sanctuary, the last refuge. When someone needed to truly disappear, they stayed here. Vernon stepped inside, and Wilma followed. The space was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet. A cot against one wall, a shelf with blankets and supplies, a lantern, a bucket for water. The air was stale but dry. On the wall opposite the cot, someone had carved names, dozens of them, crowded together, initials and dates spanning decades. "They left their marks," Vernon said quietly. "The ones who stayed here. Opal told me once that this room saved at least 20 lives directly, women who would have been killed if they'd been found." Wilma ran her fingers over the carvings. "MK, 1947, L.R. 1953, S.W. 1968. Stories she'd never know, women she'd never meet, lives preserved by this hidden space. "The supplies are still fresh," she said, noticing canned goods with recent dates. "I replace them twice a year. Opal asked me to, before she died. Said you never know when someone might need a safe place." They returned upstairs. Vernon left for home, promising to return in the morning. Wilma heated soup from one of the cans he'd brought, fed Tully, and sat at the kitchen table with more journals. She found the ledger in a drawer, a separate record from the daily journals. Names, or rather, initials. 247 entries spanning 1941 to 2024. The last entry was dated 3 months before Opal's death. T.G., age 42, staying until safe passage arranged. Beside each entry was a symbol, a small drawing. Some were simple, a bird, a tree, a star. Others more elaborate, flowers, houses, suns. Wilma puzzled over them until she found the key in the back of the ledger. They indicated outcomes. A bird meant the woman had left safely. A tree meant she'd stayed in the area, established a new life. A star meant Opal had lost track of her. Most entries had birds, many had trees. A heartbreaking few had question marks, women who'd left, but whose fates remained unknown. Wilma closed the ledger and sat in the quiet house. The fire in the wood stove crackled. Outside, the animals settled for the night. The mountains held their darkness close. This house had been many things: home, refuge, resistance. It had sheltered the desperate and transformed the trapped into the free. For 70 years, Opal had maintained it alone, asking nothing, expecting nothing, simply doing what she believed was right. The responsibility of that legacy pressed down on Wilma. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted it. She'd come to the mountains seeking peace, seeking escape from obligation and expectation. Instead, she'd found purpose, whether she wanted it or not. By the end of the first week, Wilma had established routines. She woke with the chickens, started the fire, made coffee. Vernon arrived by 8, and they worked together on repairs until afternoon. Then he'd leave, and she'd spend evenings reading journals or exploring the house's contents. The place revealed itself slowly. In the upstairs rooms, 2 bedrooms and a small study, she found decades of record-keeping, account books tracking every penny Opal had earned and spent. The financial picture was austere. Opal had lived simply, putting everything extra toward maintaining the sanctuary. In a cedar chest in the larger bedroom, Wilma found a quilt. Massive, handmade, unlike anything she'd seen. The pattern was chaos, hundreds of fabric scraps sewn together, calico and silk, denim and velvet, cotton and wool. She spread it across the bed. Looking closer, she noticed small details. Embroidered initials on some squares, dates stitched in corners. M.S. 1945, P.V. 1961, K.L. 1978. Each piece was from a different woman. The quilt was a record, documenting everyone who'd passed through. Wedding dress, silk white, delicate, stained. Work shirt, cotton. Baby blanket, flannel, soft and faded. Each piece carried a story she could only imagine. She found letters in the chest, brief thank yous written months or years later. Some included photographs of children, new homes, lives rebuilt. None used full names. One letter stood out, dated 1973. Dear Opal, you won't remember me. I was only there 3 days, 20 years ago. But I remember you. I remember you didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. I remember you told me I was strong enough to leave. And I believed you. I'm writing because my daughter just graduated college. She's the first in our family to do that. She doesn't know about those 3 days, about the man I ran from. She just knows she has a mother who loves her. That exists because you gave me a place to catch my breath. On the 8th day, Vernon brought news. Planning Commission meeting is tonight. You should come. The meeting was in the county courthouse. About 30 people attended. Wilma and Vernon sat in back. The commission worked through routine business before reaching the item Vernon mentioned: proposal for Kentmere Recreation Area Development. Mr. Wallace, you have the floor. The man who stood was the same one from the carriage house. He wore a suit now, polished and confident. Mountain Vista Development seeks to create a recreation area in Kentmere Hollow. Hiking trails, camping facilities, a visitor center. This would bring tourism revenue while preserving natural beauty. He described economic benefits, environmental considerations. It sounded reasonable. There's one property that presents a challenge: 3 acres in the center of the proposed area, currently privately owned but vacant for months. The structure is in disrepair, potentially dangerous. We're requesting the county consider condemnation proceedings. Wilma's pulse quickened. That was her land. Has the owner been contacted? A commissioner asked. We're attempting to locate them. The estate is in probate. That's a lie, Wilma said, standing. Wallace turned, recognition flashing. I'm Wilma Gorse. I inherited that property. The estate is not in probate, it transferred to me legally 3 weeks ago. The structure is not abandoned. I'm living there and making repairs. The commissioners exchanged glances. The chairman cleared his throat. We weren't informed of your ownership, because Mr. Wallace assumed no one would claim it. That property has been in my family 80 years. It's not for sale. I oppose this development. Wallace's smile never wavered. I understand attachment to family property, but surely you see the benefit. We're prepared to offer fair market value, well above assessment. It's not for sale. Perhaps we could discuss privately. There's nothing to discuss. The answer is no. The chairman intervened. Mr. Wallace, if the property is privately owned and the owner objects, we can't proceed without substantial cause. Do you have evidence of violations or hazards? Wallace hesitated. Not at this time, but the property should be inspected. Schedule an inspection through proper channels. Miss Gorse will be notified. We'll table this pending results. Outside, Wallace caught up to Wilma in the parking lot. Miss Gorse. Could I have a moment? Vernon moved closer, protective, but Wilma nodded. I think we started off wrong. The development would genuinely benefit the region. I'm authorized to offer $200,000. That's generous for 3 acres with a structure that needs substantial renovation. You're what, 60? You really want to spend your retirement maintaining a falling-down house in the middle of nowhere? I'm 63, Wilma said evenly. And yes, that's exactly what I want. The property isn't for sale. Not now. Not ever. She walked to her truck, Vernon beside her. Behind them, Wallace stood in the parking lot, his professional mask finally slipping. The inspection came a week later. 2 county officials arrived without warning, one with a clipboard, the other with a camera. Wilma met them at the door, Tully at her side. Miss Gorse, we're here for the building inspection. County order. She let them in, following as they moved through the house. They tested floorboards, examined walls, inspected the foundation. They photographed everything, took notes constantly. After 2 hours, they emerged from the 2nd floor. The structure is sound, the one with the clipboard said, sounding disappointed. Foundations solid, framing is good. The roof needs work, but we see active repairs. So no violations, Wilma said. Not structural, no. But we'll need to verify septic compliance, electrical safety, occupancy permits if you're living here full-time. The house has been occupied since 1940. Those permits lapsed when the property was vacant. You'll need to reapply. How long does that take? 6 to 8 weeks. Maybe longer if there are complications. He handed her forms. You can't legally occupy the property until permits are approved. And if I continue living here, that would be a violation. We'd have to escalate to code enforcement. They left. Vernon emerged from the woods, where he'd been watching. Permits, Wilma said flatly. They want me out while they process paperwork that could take months. It's harassment. Question is whether you're willing to fight. I'm not leaving. Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure increased. A fire marshal cited the wood stove as a hazard. An environmental inspector declared the hand pump unsafe without testing. A health official tagged the property for septic inspection, though the outhouse had functioned for decades. Each visit came with forms, fees, timelines, stretching into months. Each official was professional, almost apologetic, but the message was clear: comply or face consequences. Wilma compiled records. She photographed every interaction, documented every requirement, kept copies of every form. At the library, she researched property law, building codes, occupancy regulations. She found cases where county overreach had been challenged successfully. She wrote letters to commissioners, to the county attorney, to her state representative. She reached out to others. Thornhill referred her to an advocacy group specializing in rural property rights. A woman named Susan called back within a day. I've seen this pattern before, Susan said. Developers identify properties they want, then use county regulations as pressure. The goal is to make ownership so difficult you give up and sell. I'm not giving up. Good, but understand what you're facing. They can drag this out for years. Legal fees can bankrupt people. Are you prepared? I don't have much money, but I have time, and I'm stubborn. Susan laughed. Stubbornness helps. Send me everything: inspection reports, correspondence, photos. Let me see if there's a pattern we can challenge. Wilma sent documents that evening. 2 days later, Susan called back. 3 of the 5 planning commissioners have business connections to Mountain Vista Development. That's a conflict of interest they should have disclosed. I'm drafting a formal complaint to the State Ethics Board. Will that stop them? It'll slow them down. But Wilma, this will be a long fight. They want your land badly. That usually means there's something about the location that's particularly valuable. After the call, Wilma spread county maps across the kitchen table. She'd been studying them, trying to understand why her 3 acres mattered so much. Vernon arrived with eggs and helped her study the maps. There, he said, pointing. The creek. Wilma looked. The property line followed the creek for a quarter-mile. The creek fed from springs higher in the mountains, running year-round, clean and cold. The only reliable water source in the immediate area. They need water rights, she said slowly, for their recreation area. Without access to the creek, their development is landlocked, Vernon finished. They could drill wells, but that's expensive and uncertain. Your property controls the water, so this was never about the house, it's about the creek. It's always about water in the mountains. Opal filed water rights claims decades ago, made sure they were ironclad. They need you to sell willingly, or they need the county to condemn it. Wilma traced the creek's path. Opal had been protecting more than women. She'd been protecting the land itself, ensuring this place would remain wild, independent, outside the reach of development. That evening, she returned to the journals, skipping ahead to recent years. The entries changed in tone as Opal aged, less clinical, more reflective. March 2020. The world is different now. Pandemic, lockdowns, fear everywhere. But here in the Hollow, life continues. The mountains don't care about viruses. The chickens still lay eggs. The creek still runs. June 2023. My hands shake now. Simple tasks take longer. This is the end of the work, at least for me. Vernon asks what will happen to the house. I tell him I've made arrangements. Wilma will come. January 2024. I won't see another spring. I'm ready. I've done what I could. The rest is up to her, the granddaughter I never got to know. Wilma, if you're reading this, trust yourself. You're stronger than you know, and this place needs that strength. Wilma closed the journal, her throat tight. Opal had died knowing Wilma would come, would stay, would fight, had believed in her across decades and distance. The weight of that faith was almost unbearable, but it was also galvanizing. 3 weeks into the fight, Wilma received a package. No return address, just her name and the Carriage house location written in careful block letters. Inside was a USB drive and a note on plain paper. You should see this. A friend. She drove into town, used the computer at the library. The drive contained scanned documents, emails, financial records, meeting minutes, all related to Mountain Vista Development and their plans for Kentmere Hollow. The emails were damning. Correspondence between Wallace and 2 county commissioners discussed encouraging property owners to sell through strategic code enforcement. One email explicitly mentioned Opal. The old woman won't sell, but she's 88. We can wait. Once she's gone, the estate will be easy to acquire. Another email, dated 3 months before Opal's death, was colder. Gorse property. Heir identified Wilma Gorse. Lives out of state. No local ties. She won't fight us. Move forward with preliminary paperwork. They'd been planning this before Opal even died. counting on Wilma being uninterested, uninformed, easy to manipulate. She printed everything, made copies, and called Susan. I have evidence. They've been coordinating with county officials. Send it immediately. This is exactly what we need. Wilma returned to the carriage house energized. The evidence changed everything. But as she pulled into the clearing, she saw Vernon's truck parked at an odd angle, his door open. He was sitting on her front steps, his face grey. "Vernon," she hurried over. "What happened? They came for my property today. Tax assessment. They're claiming I owe 5 years of back taxes plus penalties, $30,000. I don't have that kind of money, Wilma. I'm on a fixed income. My land has been in my family for 100 years, and I can't." His voice broke. She sat beside him. "This is retaliation, because you've been helping me." "I know, but knowing it doesn't change the bill. I have 60 days to pay, or they start foreclosure." Wilma's mind raced. "Susan, the advocacy lawyer I've been working with, she needs to know about this. It's part of the pattern. Lawyers cost money. She's working with me for free through the advocacy group. Let me talk to her. If they're doing this to you because of me, we fight it together." Vernon nodded, but his expression remained bleak. Wilma helped him inside, made coffee, and called Susan right there from the kitchen. Susan listened, asked sharp questions, and finally said, "This is textbook retaliation. We can fight it, but you need to file a formal complaint immediately. Document everything, your tax payment history, property assessment records, anything showing this assessment is abnormal." Wilma spent that evening helping Vernon gather his records. He was meticulous, had kept every receipt and tax statement for decades. The pattern was clear. His assessments had been consistent for years, then suddenly quintupled this year without explanation. "We'll fight this," she told him as he left. "They're not taking your land." Alone again, she returned to the metal box from the cellar. She'd been avoiding the remaining documents, afraid of what else she might learn. But now, with the fight escalating, she needed to understand everything. The birth certificate was on top, yellowed and official, the 3rd of May, 1952. Mother, Caroline Gorse. Father, unknown. Beneath it, adoption papers for Anne Fletcher, adopted by Margaret and Harold Fletcher 6 months later. But there was another document beneath those. A birth certificate from 1928. Mother, Eleanor Gorse. Father, unknown. Child, Opal Margaret Gorse. Wilma stared at it, her understanding reshuffling. Eleanor Gorse, that had been her great-grandmother's name, which meant Opal wasn't her great-aunt at all. She was. She pulled out the next document, another adoption record, Opal Margaret Gorse, adopted by Eleanor's sister Margaret in 1929. The same pattern, the same cycle. Eleanor had given birth to Opal and given her to her sister to raise. Then Opal had delivered Caroline's baby and given her to her own sister Margaret. The women in her family had been passing children among themselves for generations, burying secrets, maintaining appearances. But there was more. Wilma found a letter dated 1982, written by Opal. "Wilma, if you've found this, you know part of the story, but not all of it. Here's the truth. I'm not your great-aunt. I'm your grandmother. Caroline is my daughter, though she was raised as my niece. Anne Fletcher is my granddaughter, raised as Caroline's sister. And you're my great-granddaughter. The lies were meant to protect us. Unmarried mothers weren't acceptable when I was young. When Caroline got pregnant at 17, I did what had been done for me. I arranged an adoption within the family. I thought I was protecting her, but I was wrong. The secrecy poisoned everything. Caroline spent her life trying to distance herself from me, from this place, from anything that reminded her of the shame she'd been taught to feel. She raised you to be respectable, proper, acceptable. I watched from a distance, unable to reach out without exposing everything. I'm telling you this now because you deserve the truth. Anne Fletcher is your aunt. Caroline was my daughter. And you carry all of us in you, whether you want to or not. I'm leaving you this house because I believe you'll understand what it means. You escaped a bad situation. You rebuilt your life on your own terms. You know what it costs to choose yourself over what others expect. That's what this place is about, giving women the choice I never had, the choice Caroline never had. The work is yours now, if you want it. But even if you don't, you should know who you come from. We're women who survived, who made impossible choices, who carried secrets that should never have been secrets, who kept going anyway. Welcome home, Wilma. Welcome to the truth. Wilma sat in the quiet kitchen, the letter trembling in her hands. Everything she knew about her family was a carefully constructed fiction. Her grandmother had been her great-aunt. Her great-aunt had been her grandmother. Her aunt was actually her mother's half-sister, raised as her mother's sister. The web of deception was dizzying. But beneath the lies was something else, a pattern of women protecting each other the only way they knew how. Flawed protection, yes, protection that came with costs. But protection nonetheless. She thought of her mother, who'd spent her whole life running from this place, from Opal, from the truth of her own birth. Who'd married young and stayed married despite everything, because leaving would have meant confronting the very thing Opal represented, the possibility of living outside the boundaries of respectability. Wilma had always thought she'd escaped her mother's life. Now she understood she'd been living Opal's life instead. The independence, the solitude, the refusal to perform for anyone. She hadn't chosen it consciously, but genetics and circumstance had shaped her into someone who could receive this inheritance and understand what to do with it. She picked up the phone and dialed information. Anne Fletcher, she said, in the same county Caroline Gorse Fletcher lived. It was a long shot, but I have 3 Anne Fletchers in that area. Would you like all 3 numbers? Wilma wrote them down. She'd call tomorrow, after she'd figured out what to say. How do you tell someone their entire understanding of their family is wrong? How do you say, you're not who you think you are, and neither am I, and the woman who raised you as her sister was actually your mother? There were no good words for that, but it needed to be said. Anne deserved the truth, even 70 years late. Outside, the mountains held their darkness. Inside, Wilma sat with the weight of generations of secrets and the growing certainty that the fight ahead was about more than property. It was about finally telling the truth. Wilma called the first number the next morning. Wrong Anne Fletcher younger, with children shouting in the background. The second number was disconnected. The third rang 4 times before someone answered. Hello? The voice was elderly, cautious. Is this Anne Fletcher, born in 1952? A pause. Who's calling? Wilma Gorse. I'm calling about family, about Opal Gorse. A longer pause. Opal died in March. I know. I inherited her property. I'm family. There are things you should know. What kind of things? Things about your birth, about your mother. I'd rather not explain on the phone. Silence, then. I'm in Millbrook. I can meet you tomorrow at the diner on Main Street. 11 o'clock. The call ended. She spent the day preparing. She gathered documents, made copies, arranged them in a folder. She rehearsed what she'd say. Nothing sounded right. Vernon came by with news from Susan. She filed the complaint about my tax assessment, got an emergency stay on the foreclosure while it's reviewed. But she says this could go either way. We have evidence of their coordination. She says it's strong but circumstantial. We need more. She wants to know if anyone else has been affected. Wilma thought about the maps. I could ask around. Be careful. If they know we're building a case, they might escalate. That night, Wilma barely slept. At dawn, she drove to Millbrook. The diner was vinyl booths and checkered floors. Anne was already there, sitting in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a cup. She looked like Caroline, like Wilma's mother. Same bone structure, same eyes. The resemblance was startling. Anne, Wilma approached slowly. The woman nodded, gestured across from her. Wilma slid in, set the folder on the table between them. "Thank you for meeting me. You said there were things I should know about my mother. Caroline died 10 years ago. I don't know what you could tell me that would matter now. Caroline wasn't your mother. Not biologically." Wilma kept her voice gentle. "Opal was. Caroline was your biological half-sister. You were born at the Carriage house in 1952 and adopted by Opal's sister Margaret. You were raised as Caroline's sister, but you were actually her daughter." Anne's face went white. "That's no. My mother would have told me. Your mother spent her whole life running from that secret." Wilma slid the folder across. "This is your birth certificate. Adoption papers. Letters Opal wrote to Caroline trying to reconnect. Caroline never opened them." Anne stared at the folder but didn't touch it. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve the truth. And because I'm trying to understand what Opal left me, not just property, but a legacy. I can't honor it while hiding secrets." Anne finally opened the folder. She read slowly, methodically, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked up. "I always knew something was wrong. The way Caroline looked at me sometimes, like she couldn't bear it. I thought maybe there'd been an affair, or..." Her voice broke. "I never imagined this. I'm sorry. Don't be. You didn't create this mess." Anne took a shaky breath. "Do you know who my father was?" "No. Opal's journals only say Caroline arrived pregnant." "Of course. Heaven forbid anyone tell the truth." Anne's laugh was bitter. "I'm 72 years old. I've lived my entire life not knowing who I really am." Wilma waited, letting Anne process. The diner hummed around them, dishes clattering, conversations, the grill hissing. Finally, Anne lowered her hands. "What else did Opal leave you?" "The Carriage house. And her work, she ran a safe house for decades, helping women escape abuse. There are journals documenting hundreds of women. And you're continuing it?" "I'm trying to, but there are developers trying to take the property. I'm fighting them, but it's complicated." Anne was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I have money. Caroline's estate, my own savings. I never had children, never spent much. What do you need?" "I can't ask you for money." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Opal helped women for 70 years and never asked for anything. The least I can do is help protect what she built. Tell me what you need." They talked for 2 hours. Anne asked about the house, the legal battle, the evidence. She asked about Opal, about the journals, about the women who'd stayed there. By the end, they had a plan. Anne would fund the legal defense through Susan's advocacy group. She'd also reach out to other women who'd known Opal, who might be willing to speak publicly about what the Carriage house had meant. "There's power in testimony," Anne said. "If we can show the county what that place represents, maybe they'll think twice about letting developers destroy it." Wilma drove back with something she hadn't had before, an ally. More than that, family. Complicated family, but family nonetheless. Vernon was waiting. Susan called. "The ethics complaint is moving forward. They're investigating the commissioners. But she says Wallace isn't going to back down." "I know, but we're not alone anymore." Wilma told him about Anne. Vernon smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "Opal knew. She knew you'd bring people together. That's what this place does." That evening, Wilma sat on the porch with Tully and watched the sun set. The chickens were roosting, the goats bedded down, the pigs snoring. The house creaked and settled, full of stories. She thought about Opal, about Anne, about her mother, about the choices women made when all options were bad, about the ways they protected each other even when protection came at a cost. The fight ahead would be hard. But she had the truth, and she had people willing to stand with her. She called Susan. "I'm ready to escalate. File whatever you need to file. I'm not backing down." "Good," Susan said, "because tomorrow Wallace is holding a press conference. He's going to paint you as an obstructionist. We need to be ready to respond." "I'll be ready." She ended the call and sat in the gathering dark. Inside, the journals waited, full of stories. Stories of survival, of escape, of transformation. Stories that needed to be told. Tomorrow, she'd start telling them. Not just to lawyers and officials, but to anyone who would listen. The developers wanted this land because it was valuable. But it was valuable for reasons they couldn't calculate. It was valuable because it had saved lives. Because it represented something rare. A place where women had been allowed to choose themselves. That was worth fighting for. Worth everything. Wallace's press conference was held on the courthouse steps. Media from regional outlets attended. Wilma watched from across the street with Vernon and Susan. Wallace stood at the microphone, professional and polished. Mountain Vista. Development has worked 3 years to bring economic opportunity to Kentmere Hollow. Our recreation area would create jobs and preserve natural beauty. One property owner is standing in the way of progress that would benefit the entire community. He painted Wilma as unreasonable, obstructionist, selfish. He emphasized economic benefits, community support, environmental planning. He never mentioned water rights, coordination with officials, or harassment. When he finished, reporters asked questions, mostly softballs about projections and timelines. One asked about the ethics investigation. Wallace dismissed it as procedural, nothing substantive. Then Susan stepped forward. Cameras swung toward her. "I'm Susan McKay, representing Miss Wilma Gorse and the Rural Property Rights Advocacy Group." Mr. Wallace omitted critical facts. The property in question controls water rights, essential to the proposed recreation area. Mountain Vista coordinated with county officials to pressure Miss Gorse through selective enforcement. "We have evidence," submitted to the State Ethics Board. She held up documents. "This isn't about blocking progress. This is about a developer using government power to force a sale. That's not development. That's corruption." Questions became sharper. Wallace deflected, but the narrative had shifted. Reporters approached Wilma afterward. She kept it simple. "I inherited property that's been in my family 80 years. It's my home, and it's not for sale. I have every right to keep it." One reporter asked about Opal. Wilma hesitated, then decided. "My great-grandmother ran a safe house for decades, helping women escape domestic violence. Hundreds found refuge there. That legacy is worth preserving." The next morning, the story ran in regional papers and local news. The angle had changed, not just development disputes, but history, women's rights, protecting significant places. Anne called that afternoon. "I've found 12 women who stayed at the Carriage house between 1960 and 2000, all willing to speak publicly. We're organizing a testimony at the courthouse next week." The gathering happened Saturday. The courthouse steps filled with women, some elderly, some middle-aged, all carrying stories. One by one they spoke, brief testimonies, just minutes each. They talked about arriving terrified, broken, hopeless. About Opal's quiet strength, her practical help. About leaving with resources and hope. One woman, 83, voice shaking. "I stayed 3 weeks in 1964. My husband had broken my jaw. Opal wired it shut, fed me soup, helped me get papers and a bus ticket. I've been married to a good man 50 years now. I have grandchildren. None of that would exist without her." Another woman. "My mother stayed there in 1978, pregnant and terrified. Opal helped her keep me, helped her find work. She gave my mother dignity when everyone else treated her like garbage." The testimonies continued for 2 hours. Media covered it. County. Commissioners attended, faces neutral. Wallace stood at the back, watching. When the last woman finished, Anne stepped forward. "This place Mr. Wallace wants to destroy saved lives. Actually, the women here are proof. Our children and grandchildren are proof. This isn't just property, it's sacred ground. We won't let it be paved over." The crowd, over 100 people, applauded. Afterward, county officials approached Susan with a proposal, a meeting to discuss resolution. She agreed, but insisted Wilma attend. The meeting was Monday. Wallace, his lawyers, commissioners, Susan, and Wilma. The terms were simple. Mountain Vista would withdraw their proposal in exchange for an easement, allowing limited public access to the creek. Limited means what? Susan asked. A footpath, no structures, no vehicles, just access for hikers. Wilma considered. It was more than she wanted to give, but less than they'd tried to take. The path can't come within 100 yards of the house, and I control maintenance and access rules. Wallace's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Acceptable. Papers were drafted. The ethics investigation would continue, but immediate pressure would cease. Vernon's tax assessment would be reviewed and corrected. It wasn't complete victory, but it was enough. The carriage house was safe. The agreement was signed on a cold November morning. Wilma watched Wallace add his signature, his movements precise. He met her eyes once across the table, and she saw something there, not respect, but acknowledgement. She'd been an obstacle he couldn't overcome. Vernon's tax assessment was corrected within the week. No apology came, but Vernon didn't need one. He had his land, his peace. Susan followed the ethics investigation. 2 commissioners resigned. The 3rd faced censure. The pattern had been exposed. Future developers would think twice. Anne became a regular visitor. She came every few weeks, sometimes staying overnight in the upstairs bedroom. She and Wilma talked for hours, constructing family history from fragments and secrets finally spoken. "Do you resent her?" Wilma asked once. "Opal for giving you up?" Anne considered. "I did, when I first learned. But the more I understand what women face then, the less room there is for resentment. She did what she thought was right with the options she had. Do you wish Caroline had told you?" "Every day. But I understand why she didn't. The shame she carried was passed down, generation to generation. She couldn't escape it, so she tried to bury it." Anne looked at the mountains. "We all carry our mother's wounds until we decide to set them down." It was late afternoon when Wilma finally opened Opal's final letter. She sat at the kitchen table with tea, the envelope worn from handling. The letter was dated 2 weeks before Opal's death. "Dear Wilma, if you're reading this, you've stayed. You've fought. You've learned the truth and decided it was worth protecting. I'm proud of you. I want to tell you something I learned too late. Peace and purpose aren't opposites. For years I thought I had to choose. I thought serving others meant sacrificing myself. I was wrong. This house gave me peace precisely because it gave me purpose. The women who came here gave me meaning, connection, a reason to wake up every morning. They made my solitude purposeful rather than empty. You came to the mountains seeking silence. I left you a sanctuary where silence is broken by women finding their voices. This is your inheritance, not the walls, but the work. You don't have to continue what I started. But if you choose to carry this forward, know that it won't diminish your peace, it will deepen it. True peace doesn't come from absence. It comes from presence, from being fully where you are, doing work that matters. I lived alone for 80 years, but I was never lonely. The hollow held me, and the women who passed through left pieces of themselves that kept me company. You're not alone either, Wilma. You're part of something larger, a lineage of women who survived, who helped each other survive, who refused to disappear quietly. Welcome home, granddaughter. Welcome to the work. Welcome to the peace that comes from purpose. With all my love, Opal. Wilma read it twice, then a third time. She folded the letter and placed it in the cedar chest upstairs. That evening, she sat on the porch with Tully and watched the first snow begin to fall. Light flakes drifted through bare branches, settling on the clearing. The animals huddled for warmth. Vernon had brought firewood earlier. Anne had called to check in. Susan had sent an update about reform proposals being discussed. Wilma sat in the gathering darkness and felt, for the first time in years, maybe ever, that she was exactly where she belonged. Not because the mountain was silent, but because the silence had transformed into something else, into presence, into purpose, into home. The red lantern hung in the window behind her, unlit but ready. Vernon had replaced the oil, checked the wick. It was waiting for whoever might need it next. Wilma didn't know if anyone would come. The world had changed. Resources existed now that hadn't before. But she knew those resources weren't always enough, weren't always accessible, weren't always safe. Sometimes what a woman needed most was exactly what this house offered, a place outside the systems that had failed her, a place where she could breathe, rest, and decide her own next step. If that woman came, Wilma would be ready. The snow fell harder now, covering everything in white. Inside, the fire crackled. The journals waited on their shelves. The hidden room held its supplies. Everything was prepared. Everything was waiting. Wilma rose and went inside, Tully following. She lit the red lantern and placed it in the window. Not because anyone was coming tonight, but because it needed to be there. A beacon, a signal, a promise. The carriage house in Kentmere Hollow was open. The sanctuary was ready. The work continued. Spring arrived slowly in Kentmere Hollow. Snow melted in patches, revealing steaming earth. The creek ran high with runoff. The animals emerged from winter, chickens laying, goats climbing, the pig wallowing happily. Wilma had wintered in the carriage house, her first full season at this elevation. It had been harder than her yurt, years more snow, more isolation, more work, but deeply satisfying in ways she was still learning to articulate. Vernon had checked on her weekly. Anne had visited twice, once for Christmas and again in February when a storm trapped them for 3 days. They'd spent hours going through Opal's journals, cataloguing entries. "This is history," Anne had said. "It needs to be preserved." The first woman arrived on a Tuesday in April. Wilma was in the garden when she heard a car. A sedan pulled into the clearing. The woman who emerged was young, maybe 30, with a toddler on her hip. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. "Is this the place?" she asked. Her voice was small. "Someone said if I needed help to look for the red lantern." Wilma's heart squeezed. "This is the place. You're safe here." The woman's face crumpled. "I don't have much money. There's no charge. Come inside." Her name was Teresa. She'd been married 5 years. Her husband had started hitting her after their daughter was born. Last night, he'd put her in the hospital. A nurse had given her the address. She said this place saved her mother 30 years ago. Over the next few days, Wilma did what Opal had done. She listened without judgment. She documented injuries. She made calls to Susan, to a social worker Anne had connected her with, to a shelter 2 counties over. She also just provided space. Teresa and her daughter Maya needed time to breathe, to sleep without fear, to imagine a future without violence. On the 5th day, Teresa said, "I'm ready. I want to press charges. I want my own place, my own life." By the time Teresa left 2 weeks later, she had legal representation, a court date, and an apartment lined up. Maya had a daycare spot. Teresa had a job interview scheduled. "I don't know how to thank you," Teresa said. "You already have. You chose yourself. You chose your daughter. That's everything." Vernon visited that afternoon. "I heard you had company. News travels fast. How'd it go?" "Good. She's safe now, or safer." Opal would be proud. That evening, Wilma called her son. Not the dutiful holiday call, but real conversation. She told him about the house, about Opal, about the work. He listened, and at the end said, "I'd like to visit. Bring Emma and the kids." "I'd like that," Wilma said, surprised by how much she meant it. Anne called in May. "I found 17 more women willing to be interviewed about Opal. We're putting together an oral history project. The State Historical Society is interested." "That's wonderful." One of the women asked if the sanctuary is still operating. "She has a niece who needs help." I told her yes. "You told her right." Summer arrived. Wilma planted the garden with heirloom seeds. Anne had brought varieties Opal had grown decades ago. The chickens multiplied. Vernon helped repair the goat pen. 2 more women came in June, 1 in July. Each stayed as long as she needed, each left with resources and hope. In August, her family visited. Her son and daughter-in-law, 2 grandchildren she barely knew. They stayed a week, sleeping upstairs, eating meals together, hiking trails Vernon showed them. Her grandson, 12, found the journals and asked about them. These are records of women who needed help. Your great-great-great-grandmother provided that help for 70 years. Now, I'm continuing it. Like a shelter, more personal, more hidden, for women who need somewhere the world can't find them. He considered this seriously. That's important work. On their last day, her son pulled her aside. I'm sorry I wasn't around more. I'm sorry I believed Dad's version without asking yours. You were young. You didn't know what questions to ask. They sat on the porch while the kids played with Tully. Wilma told him about the marriage, about the escape, about finding herself in wilderness, about the isolation she'd sought and the connection she'd found instead. Are you happy? He asked. Wilma thought about it. Content, purposeful, at peace. Yes, she said, I'm happy. After they left, the house felt fuller rather than emptier. In September, on a morning when aspens were turning gold, Wilma sat at the kitchen table and opened a new journal. She wrote, September 15. 1 year since I arrived. In that time, this place has become home in ways I never expected. I came seeking peace through isolation. I found peace through purpose instead. Opal left me more than property. She left me a choice to continue hiding or to engage meaningfully. I chose engagement. I chose the work. I chose to light the red lantern and keep it burning. 4 women have found sanctuary here. I hope there will be more, and I hope there won't need to be. Both things can be true. For whoever comes after me, granddaughter, stranger, whoever inherits this place next, know that the work matters. The individual lives saved matter. The quiet resistance matters. The mountains hold us. The house shelters us. The work continues. This is sanctuary. This is home. She closed the journal and looked around. Sunlight streamed through clean windows. The wood stove radiated warmth. Tully slept in his spot. Outside, the animals moved through their routines. Everything was as it should be. Wilma walked to the window. The red lantern hung there, ready. Beyond the clearing, the mountains rose into blue sky. She was home, finally, completely home. And the work, Opal's work, now her work would continue for as long as it was needed.